Thank you for joining us here today for another session as part of the Smith.ai Master Series, where we talk to industry leaders on how small business owners and specifically law firm owners can make a bigger difference in running their practices and running their operations. Talk about sales and marketing topics and a lot of just general business practices on how to be more efficient. So today we have Melissa Shanahan from Velocity Work, who is a podcaster and also a business owner, joining us here today. And we're going to be talking about establishing goals, both short-term goals and long-term goals. And we throw term goals around and goal setting around so often, whether it's in business or in our personal lives with dieting or running and fitness and all these things that we do. And I think that most people don't either take them seriously enough or know how to craft them and how to stick to them in both our personal lives and our business life. They're so important in order to help make a difference in accomplishing those goals and actually changing the way that we do business to be more profitable. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's going to be a really great 40 minutes or so here. And I do invite anyone on the line to just type in any questions you might have, either using the chat channel or the Q&A. I'll be monitoring that on this screen here as I manage the conversation here with Melissa. But I'll turn it over to her, let her introduce herself, talk about her firm, and then we can get into how to set better goals for your law firm.
Awesome. Thank you. It's an honor to be a part of this series. I really appreciate the opportunity. Well, everyone, for those of you who may not know who I am, I thought I'd give a little bit of background about who I am and why I care about what I care about and why I do what I do. I used to work for a consulting firm that did many things for private practices all across the US and Canada and beyond, but I mostly was US and Canada. And my role was specifically focused on hosting quarterly business planning retreats. And we called those strategic planning retreats. And so over the years, I was trained on that and then became the person that was training the people to go out in the field and do those things. At any given time, I was in 12 to 14 offices a month. So we would travel to the client and lead these sessions. So I was on the road full time. And I learned a lot through it. It was my most favorite thing I did at that job was strategic planning retreats. Well, we were a medium-sized firm. I naturally hit barriers that you might expect to hit at a bigger company. And one of those was that I was one of a few people who were boots on the ground with these clients, leading strategic planning retreats. But I'd come back in 90 days. And I mean, we had set amazing plans. Everybody was motivated. It was like the world was full of opportunity. And then I'd come back in 90 days and they wouldn't have everything done. They wouldn't have been tracking certain things. And, I had a lot of compassion for these people and empathy for these people because they were essentially, in many cases, business owners who had two full-time jobs, running a business and doing whatever their skill was. So when I worked with doctors, dentists, anyone who has a trade that they were trained on, that's who we were working with. And I really felt like we could do a better job helping them along the way. Like there's things we can do to get them to be more successful. They just need help. They need support, accountability, et cetera. So, you take those ideas back to headquarters and it's like, sure. Like who knows when that would have actually been processed through on how we could do something like that. And it got to be where I just felt like, number one, I was tired of being on the road. Number two, I loved my job. I loved it. And number three, I saw opportunity to do a better job. And so when I left the company, I chose to work with law firm owners. And that's a whole nother story, but that's how I decided to work with law firm owners. And my whole goal with setting up Velocity Work is to help and be a supporting partner for the law firm owners on their growth journey and building the firm that they want to build, not just growth for growth's sake, and making sure that they are consistently making progress, not just making plans and things are falling through the cracks.
Mhm.
So that idea that I had was over 5 years ago, and here we are now, and our company has grown a lot, and we're supporting a lot of law firm owners. And I always say, and this is why I named the company what I named it, Velocity Work. what we focus on with law firm owners is the work that creates velocity. And if you don't have these, like some of the things we'll talk through today, if they aren't top of mind, naturally you do not experience the progress that you could be experiencing towards what it is that we say we want for ourselves. So that's a bit of background. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's share your screen because I know you have a visual here
Yeah.
on your methodology. And I think the best place to begin is to address the fact that when you work with clients, you're talking about their whole journey throughout their phases of growth. We're just taking, for this topic here today, the very, very, very beginning of that journey, I would imagine. So is this the very first starting point that you work with clients on, is goal setting? And explain to us why that's so important to begin there.
When you say the very beginning, you don't mean like the very beginning of a law firm lifting off the ground.
No, beginning to scale. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so yeah, because I was gonna say we actually don't work with firms that don't have an established business yet. Once they have an established business, this will make a whole much more sense for people. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not really good takeaways for someone who's in that startup
Absolutely.
phase,
Right. Because
but
they need to set goals too and understand what, realistically they can manage with the resources that they have, the team that they have, et cetera.
totally. Yeah, exactly. So, when we basically our company is centered around the principles that you see on this document, which I'll explain. And we have a really specific path for doing that with people. And so it is the beginning, I guess you would say it is something that we cover in the beginning, but I maybe if I could alter what you said a little bit, it's the everything. It doesn't matter if I'm working with a private client or someone in a membership program. Everything is centered around this framework. So at the bottom, you can see there's aim, and then level 2 is plan. Level 3 is honor your plan, and number 4 is win. And the this is like a three-legged stool. That's the way I think about this: aim, plan, and honoring your plan. If you have to know what you're aiming for. You have to have some sense of clarity about what you are trying to create. Growth for growth's sake is not clarity. And people, I'll ask people like, what are your goals? What are you aiming for? And they'll say more freedom, more time off, more money. Like they'll say things like that. That's not that clear. Everybody wants those things for themselves, no matter where they are in their journey. So what is it like? Paint that picture for yourself. What kind of, like, if you're going to put a pin in the map, where is that pin? Where are we going here? How do you know that you're successful? How do you know that you've actually gotten to the place that you said you wanted to get to? Maybe it's a number, right? Some people it's a number in their head. But some people it's a certain number of hours a week with a number in their head that they would like to hit in terms of revenue, for example. But getting clear about what it means to you, because the person sitting next to you, their definition of success for themselves is going to be different, and you need to be clear about your own. So that's the first thing we help facilitate is what are you aiming for specifically?
So,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
just to interject, I can't
Mhm.
imagine that this is that setting goals and understanding the importance of them is a unfamiliar territory for business owners. They must understand it. Where have they gone wrong in the past? Did they just not set them up right? Did they not understand there's a methodology to this? Is it a lack of commitment? Where do you find that when you begin working with the client, where have they struggled in the past? Why are they working with you?
It's a lack of knowledge about how to do this well. And because they think they are clear that they want more time off or whatever, but there's no specificity at all. So if you do think about this like a map, and we use this metaphor a lot inside of velocity work, you have to put a pin in the map. And in most cases, when I first meet someone, they know a region on the map that they want to shoot for, but they don't have like specificity around what matters to them.
Okay.
And that's not super easy. And so if you can imagine, as I'm facilitating this, and it's actually, they have to really stop and think to answer my questions when I'm facilitating. They are not going to facilitate themselves in the way that an outsider is. So could they get clear on their own? Yeah. If they slow down to ask themselves the right questions and they have enough patience to sit to be able to answer. But that's really tough. That's tough even for me. I think facilitation is really important as we're for business owners and goal setting and thinking through things. I do this for a living, and it's really helpful for an outsider to ask me questions that lets me sort of surface answers that are meaningful. So I don't know that it's necessarily that they've gone wrong. They
Mhm.
just haven't woken up yet to a way to think about this. It's going to serve them instead of, thinking vaguely. Getting them to think clearly and specifically is not easy, but it is simple. And that's something we help facilitate.
So what are the repercussions of being too vague? I want to make more money. I
Yeah.
want more freedom. Like these very ambiguous, fluid type of goals. What happens when those are their goals that they've set? Obviously, they're
So, oh,
difficult, if not impossible to reach because they're so vague. But what else kind of happens from there?
I think that question will be better answered if I finish walking through steps 2 and 3, and then we could talk about, because it plays into steps 2 and 3.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Does that
I've
sound
I have a
good?
habit of jumping ahead. Okay, so
No,
let's.
I know, I love it. I'm all about it. Okay, so once you know specifically what you're aiming for, then the next step, or the next leg on this three-legged stool is to be able to make a well thought out, deliberate plan for how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be. And so as you're thinking through things, and you can see that I have over to the side facts.
Mhm.
Facts are a huge piece, which is data in your firm, a huge piece of this puzzle. So it is one thing to say, this is what I want it to look like when I get here. And you have to put numbers to that. You are a business. You have to put a number to it. It's not the only thing that matters, but it also matters. And when you think through the number that you're shooting for, and then it's important to evaluate, where are you now with your numbers? And it's not just revenue, although that's sort of the mother of everything, trickles down from revenue. It's not the most important number maybe to you, but every other number that might be the most important number doesn't happen without a certain amount of revenue. So we have to have that. And when you look at where you are now in terms of revenue, and in the next page, you will see some specific stats and metrics that you should be tracking. And when you get really clear about that for yourself and where you are now, and you think through, what about these numbers has to change, not just revenue, but what about, the average case value? What about the number of cases or matters that I open every month, or close, depending on your fee structure? Uh, what are the things that matter most? Conversion rate, how does that need to shift? So you can really think through, like, these are the things that need to improve. These are the levers I need to pull in order to get me to where I want to go. So that's part of planning, is really looking at the facts and figuring out where you want to go. The reason I put facts here and not just data is because we say something a lot inside of Velocity Work, which is facts, not feelings. People go on hunches and not numbers way too often. So this is an important part of planning, is getting dirty with your data, basically. And so then once you have that, you can make some plans about, not just from a numbers perspective, like, okay, these are the milestones along the way that are important to hit, but what are the efforts that I'm going to have to put forth in order for those numbers to even be possible? So oftentimes, and this is what we refer to as rocks, which are quarterly priorities. And if you're familiar with traction, uh, EOS and Gino Wickman popularized that term. They did not invent that term, but rocks. So key quarterly priorities, that you can almost think of them as projects or initiatives that you're going to have to execute and complete in order to be on track for what you say you want. So if you want to, for instance, one of the things that has to change is your conversion rate. You are going to have to figure out, what are you going to do in order for that conversion rate to improve? Are you going to sign up for a course? Are you going to hire a marketing company to help you? What are you going to do? Are you going to write some scripts so that conversion is better? Are you going to use Smith.ai as a partner in your journey in that? Like, these are the things, people who don't use Smith, oftentimes it's a rock. Sign
Mhm.
up with Smith so that I can help myself get to the places that I want to get to the numbers I want to see. So this is what I mean by planning. It's about numbers, but then what's the effort? What are you going to do specifically? And choosing just constraining down to picking a few things in the quarter that you're going to get done. That helps you identify where your effort should be focused for the quarter. And then you can, at the end of the quarter, you can evaluate. But this is all, those are the two biggest pieces of making a plan. And I think quickly, because I don't have to talk a ton here, although there's lots of good conversation here that may come up on this call, you have to honor your plan. This is the third leg of the stool. And this is tough because we are all busy. You guys are split between, in many cases, court and your office, dealing with client things, dealing with a team in some instances. And, honoring your plan sounds nice, but that is very difficult to do. And, number one and number two is what we do quarterly strategic planning retreats that get you your hands around number one, number two, aiming and planning. And then in between quarters, we are a supporting partner to help ensure that you are honoring your plan. The barriers that you're experiencing will help eliminate. There's accountability, there's support, there's community. It's important. What are you going to do to set yourself up to be able to honor your plan, knowing that you will likely have many things vying for your attention and you're going to get distracted. You might even forget that you were supposed to do some of these things. But it's a three-legged stool. So if you aren't aiming very well, it's very difficult to have a good plan.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just say you are aiming well. You're aiming really well, but you don't have a well thought out plan. You can't honor anything. And if you do have a really good aim and a really good plan, but you don't follow through, you can see the same thing. The progress doesn't get to happen. It takes all three for progress to happen. And it almost sounds too simple, but it is exactly the truth. It's the difference between people who make a lot of progress and people who make incremental progress and sort of spin, and then they'll make some more and they sort of spin. It is the work that creates velocity. So to answer your question, if I go back to what you said, I think you said like, was your question, what do I notice about people who aren't good at planning?
Where do they fall short by creating vague goals, by setting
Yes.
vague goals?
Okay. And in that instance, if they create vague goals and they don't have a ton of clarity, then it's going to be very difficult to set up a plan that gets them anywhere. What's the quote? If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Like that's kind of what it's like.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you do know where you're going and you have a pin in the map, there's different routes you can take. There's not a blueprint, one path to get there. There's different routes you can take, but you can sort that route. You can chart the milestones. And if you don't have a pin in the map, what are we doing?
Okay, a question just came in.
Okay.
Address it now rather than waiting because it's relevant to what you were just talking about.
Sure.
What are rocks? And can you go into detail about what that stands for and represents?
Yeah. So rocks, the concept of rocks and the way that we talk about it was, as far as I could tell, first introduced to the world by Stephen Covey in his books, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about rocks, pebbles, sand. And growing up when I was little in church is where I saw this first demonstrated. I think that's true for a lot of people, but basically there's a demonstration you can look up on, just go, search it on YouTube, rocks, pebbles, sand demonstration. And they have 2 jars in front of them, and they have a bucket of rocks, a bucket of pebbles, and a bucket of sand. Sand represents the meaningless filler in our lives. So, the busy work, I guess you could say, the stuff that we check out to do. So, in like scrolling on social media, like,
Fills the time. Yeah, right.
yeah,
Fills the
it's not
bar,
really
fills the
adding
time.
to the value of your life. Okay, but then there's pebbles. Those are important things, but not the most important things. And then rocks are the most important things. They represent the most important priorities. Now, if you fill the jar with sand first, then pebbles, the rocks don't fit. But if you put into the jar first and you prioritize the rocks first, then you fill with pebbles and then the sand, it all fits into the jar. And there's a professor somewhere that I've seen that pours in a beer afterwards and says, and then you get to have a beer or something like that. But
I like that guy.
but so the idea that was sparked way back when was that you calling or identifying the most important priorities as rocks. Now, through there's a man named Vern Hernish who has a company called Scaling Up there, and he was the mentor to Gino Wickman, who is EOS, or there's a very popular book that EOS wrote called Traction that lays out their framework for growing a company. And they use the term rocks too. And so when you think about rocks, you have to have goals. If you don't have goals, you do not need rocks. But if you have goals, and then you ask yourself, like let's say you have a revenue goal, you have a number of matters open goal, and maybe a conversion rate goal. Like if I'm just going to stick with the 3 examples we used earlier, those are my goals. And if you sit back and look at those goals and you ask yourself, what are the levers I need to pull in order to be able to reach those numbers? What are the things that if I don't do them, I will be held back from reaching those numbers? And what surfaces is usually there's a brainstorm that happens when you get these ideas on, like, I need to train this team member better. I need to hire Smith.ai. I need to, like, you kind of know there are things that you could do, should do, want to do, but now you have a target. And so, of all the things that we could do, should do, want to do as business owners, it hones you in to figure out the most important things that if you don't do them, you will be held back. And identifying those, each one of those is called a rock. That's how, and that's a terminology I use because I was, I was trained in that. And yeah, it tends to land well with people. So I keep that terminology, but I could easily say your most important quarterly efforts or your most important quarterly projects. I could say something like that too, and it might, but just doesn't quite have the same ring as rocks.
How about the time period? Does it have to be quarterly? Why not monthly? Why not annually? Why not biannually? How do you
So,
work with clients as to what their time frame should look like for short-term goals and long-term goals, and how do those
yep.
vary?
Yep. So in terms of timing, okay, quarterly, generally speaking, for an established business is a really good length of time. It's not too long where things sort of get lost. It's not too short. So you can actually get some big things done.
Mhm.
And that's why 90 days just tends to work. Business is on quarters, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. So it just sort of flows really well with business. Um, Now, my caveats to that are if you are a startup, things are way more hustly in a startup. Like you just need matters through the door. You don't, depending on how early you are, you don't even know what systems you should have in place because you haven't dealt with the clients to help you figure out this is how this needs to look. And it's messier. Starting up a business is messier. Now, in that case, I would say monthly because you have to iterate. You're going to fail to figure out like what's working, what's not working. So I think in a startup instance, a quarter is probably too long. And I think that if you are a company in crisis, I think a quarter is too long. I think monthly should be better. Like when COVID happened, people, in my opinion, should have been every month revisiting, like, this is what we're trying to make happen this month because there was so much uncertainty and it was crisis mode for nearly everyone. But other than that, those two those two caveats, 90 days is really a perfect time frame to be able to get a lot done in a pretty short amount of time in the grand scheme of things.
So, speaking of iterations, whether it's a month at a time or quarter at a time, how do they go about adjusting their goals to kind of react to changes in their environment, in the market, with their clientele, with their business operations? How do they adjust their goals to be
Okay.
realistic and to help meet them?
Yeah, good question. I'm a strong believer if you are in that window or that batch of most businesses that quarterly planning makes sense, not monthly, but no matter what time frame you're using, you should not be changing your goals. You should set a goal and you should be committed to doing whatever you can to get yourself there and get your team there. This doesn't all have to be on your shoulders. But when you set a goal in the middle of a quarter is not the time to be changing your mind about things. I
Mhm.
have clients who've tried to do this before. Well, they will set rocks, for example, like what they said they were going to do in order to get themselves to the goal. And in the middle of the quarter, they're like, I don't know, I feel like we might have set the wrong rocks. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? What? It's a we'll talk through it a little bit, and it's just them getting antsy and squirrely. People are not used to having follow through to completion on something,
Mhm.
and a lot of this is because there's so many things pulling at you, and it's easy to be distracted by other important things. But that's the work. That's the hard part of honoring the plan. So adjusting in the middle rarely ever makes sense unless there is a dire, drastic, like emergency kind of situation, then sure, but that's not the case for most people.
Right.
And then at the turn of the quarter, let's say you set some annual goals. At the turn of the quarter, you could that's the time to lift your head, take stock of the quarter you just had, make some adjustments or plans for the future if need be. So if you're heading into Q4 and you are so far off track of your revenue goal, okay, it may be time to adjust. Like, okay, if I could just get here, that would be amazing. And you can make adjustments, but not in the middle of the quarter.
So what's the difference between a short-term goal and a long-term goal? How long is a short-term goal? How long is a long-term goal? And why do you need both of those? Or do you need
Yeah.
both of those?
Yeah. Um, Long-term goals are important so that you like when we talk about what you're aiming for.
Mhm.
So we put a pin in the map that should be about a year or more out. And it's important to do that so you can work backwards to figure out, okay, well, what does that mean? Where do I need to be? Let's say you have an annual goal that you're setting out, a 12-month goal. You can ask yourself, where do I need to be at the end of the next quarter so that I'm on track for that. And so then you can set a shorter term goal. So I
Mhm.
think both are important. How far out you go really depends on most people can't go beyond 3. And honestly, most people can't even get to 3. They're more like 2 or 1, and that's fine. The more I use this word um and I hope it doesn't sound insulting to anyone, but it really is the truth. The more that you mature as a business owner and the more stability you create, the further out you can look with, and it doesn't, your brain doesn't skits out. um, when you, when you are still learning how to be able to plan very well and execute on those plans and what needs to happen for that, when you're in the beginning of learning that, sometimes a year is as far out as you can see, and that's okay. Um, but I do think both nearer term and goals that are set further out are important, but you don't have to go out. Like some people talk about 10-year goals. I mean, shoot, I teach this stuff. I don't know where I want to be in 10 years. That's not that
Yeah.
helpful. We aren't Coca-Cola here. We don't need to figure that out right now.
Right.
If you have a really clear picture for 10 years, that's fine, but I never put pressure on someone to have that, if that makes sense.
Another question. How should things be different for a tax accounting firm, for instance, where Q1 is huge and subsequent quarters not so
Mhm.
much?
Yeah.
Where seasonality dramatically affects your business and your
Um,
revenue streams. How should goals be set to accommodate that?
Yeah. So one of the questions I ask when we facilitate, because once people have their annual goal, let's say, we have a space for them to write in, okay, this is Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Or if they're in the middle of the year, like they have a 12-month goal. So it could be Q3, Q4, Q1, Q2, right? So wherever you are, there's going to be 4 quarters that you're writing in. And one of the questions we ask is this annual goal that you have, how do you want to weight the quarters? WEIGHT, weight them. And because of seasonality. So some people just know, for instance, like this, the person's asking, their Q1 is going to be more fruitful in terms of revenue because of the nature of their business. So naturally, you would set that goal, you would weight it higher. And so when people think about this, they usually think, which they don't have to, but what seems natural for a lot of people is thinking in percentages. Like, 40% of my annual income comes in Q1. Okay. So if we know that, if that's been a pattern ish, then maybe you set a 40% goal of your annual target for Q1. And then you could figure out how you want to divvy up the rest of the quarters. But it is important to think through that because some businesses do have a cyclical nature in that
Mhm.
way.
So I imagine that the writing of the goals should be the traditional SMART criteria, right? Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. So knowing that when these business owners or law firm owners are setting these, what does seem to be realistic and attainable when you're going to coach them on setting those? How do they know what seems to be realistic for them? And what
So
are the questions that you're asking in order to help them decide if 15% growth is realistic versus 50% growth, for instance?
yeah. Yeah. Okay. I just did a podcast on this recently because people, when they start early out, naturally, I mean, when you're going from like 200,000 and you're growing, your growth rate is a higher percentage because you're going from like 2 to 400,000,
Bigger
which is,
jumps. Right,
yeah,
right.
it's like that's 100% growth. So, you know, so people start to think that that's just what they need to keep up, that if that pace
Mhm.
doesn't keep up, something's wrong. And so I did a whole episode on this. Like, you need to back down because you will kill yourself. You can implode your business by doing that. And for what? Why do we need to do that? So it's better. There's a couple things about what you asked that feel worth mentioning. The You need to have a goal that feels like a stretch. And the reason that I can't just say a certain percentage, I mean, generally speaking, if nothing is drastically changing about your business, 20% goal is super freaking healthy. I
Mhm.
usually don't approach goal setting that way. I more look at it as when we're thinking backwards, I ask people when they're deciding what to aim for, what do you as an owner want for yourself? Because they don't normally have it yet for themselves. They're either working too much or they're not taking home enough money, or like, what's the ideal for you? Now, if that's true, what does the business need to do in order to support that for you? That's sort of phase one of determining what kind of growth should be happening. We just want to get them so that they enjoy their existence within their firm. And what is that going to take? And so sometimes they will say $1 million, like, my firm needs to make 1 million because then I have expenses. Um, Taxes is taken out of profit. So basically, and I need to pay these people. So what's left over, that, like, what would be left over is what I want to take home. And I only want to be working, 35 hours a week. I'm tired of working 65 hours a week or more. So
Mhm.
that's the kinds of things we help to get them clear. And so for someone that knows that they need to do that, if they are currently, if their revenue is currently 400,000 and they know that they want to shoot for 1 million at some point, they have to go out further. And, you know, how long do you think it will take you to build the infrastructure to be able to support, like, to be able to generate that kind of revenue? And so then they'll think forward and they'll think, I bet that will take me 2.5, 3 years. Okay. So now, what would you need to do in order, like, we ask a bunch of questions and figure out in the next year what would have to happen. And then that's how they sort of back into their number, and whatever number they land on has to feel like a stretch. If it feels easy, why are we not shooting for more? If you're on a path for something, right? It's not just about making more money. That's not what I'm saying. But if it feels easy and in 3 years you want to be at a certain place, why not stretch yourself a bit more? And um it needs to feel, you have to believe in it. I guess that's what I want to say. If it feels too big where you're just like, that's never going to happen, but okay, I'll write that number down. Like, that's not helpful to anybody. Um, Also, some extra context on this, like, people talk about 10xing your business. Like, that is so hypey. Like, come on. What are you trying to do here? You can 10x your business, but there's and I think there's some fruitful things that come out of a mental exercise to think about what would have to change in order to 10x your business. But to write that goal down for, in 1 year or 2 years, I'm going to 10x my business, for what? Like, what are you trying to do? What do you really want? More money. I am certain that most people want more money.
Mhm.
Most
Mhm.
people want more time, but that is not like the 10xing idea. That's not your vision. That's a vision that you're glomming onto. Create your own vision. Work backwards from that.
I was going to ask what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but you kind of explained that they kind of work hand in hand. Because I was going to say, do you set your goal at whatever 20% increase in revenue growth, and then start getting into building the plan itself, and then you find out that this business owner only wants to work 35 hours instead of 65 hours, and then, oh wait, Now you got to go back and iterate on that goal because it's not feasible. If you're working less, there's less billable hours, there's less income coming in, which means you're not going to hit that 20% growth or whatever that was. So how do they go hand in hand, and how do you go about building the plan once that goal is set? Because that's when you start getting into, this is how many hours you need to work, this is how many billable hours you need to work.
Well, wait. The sentence, though, that is an interesting sentence. This is the number of hours you have to work. That's the number of hours that has to be billed in the firm. So this is where hiring
totally
comes
different
in.
story. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, so who do you need to hire? And how do you know when you're ready to hire, financially safe to hire? Like these are all conversations.
When you get into actually those business changes and recommendations, is that part of the plan, and is the goal already set? Okay.
Yes, that's the plan. So you have your goal. It's like, okay, remember when I said there's different routes to get there. So you could do it on your own. It'll probably suck. But so then how else can we get there? So you get to pick your path. And now listen, the thing about planning is it's so important to plan. If you aren't, you're not moving with efficiency and effectiveness in the way that you could. But your plan is literally never going to go as you had planned. And so the plan going perfectly isn't the point. It's about you getting organized about what needs to happen and being committed to getting yourself there. And, and when I say that your plan's not going to go perfectly, let's say you do make a hire that's going to be really helpful for production purposes. Maybe it's a paralegal even, so you hire someone, but it doesn't pan out, or that person has to move, or, and so then your plan is not going according to plan. It doesn't mean it's dead. It just means there's a hiccup. So this is when people will just kind of fall flat. And that's part of the honoring your plan, is like, okay, that didn't pan out. It doesn't mean you get to quit on your plan. How else are you going to fulfill what you've identified through data much of the time needs to happen so that you can have what you want in your firm? So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You are. Let's add some more concrete to this. So let's say that the goal is set 20% revenue growth over the next, 6 months, year.
But okay, they can do that. I never do that with people. I never set a goal that way. It's more about looking at where you are now and figuring out, like, your opportunity. Everybody on this call, if you were to look at, and some of you probably don't know your numbers right now, like where you are for the year, but let's just say you had that information and you were looking at that number and you're thinking, if I actually want to get here by the end of the year, what would I need to do to make that happen? Your opportunities. And so then you can start to figure out, like, is that number realistic? Is that a stretch? Like, I think going for 20%, and I just want to say this to clarify, I think that is a disconnected way to think about your growth. I think that you can easily grow 20% year over year by figuring out that stretch. Like, this is what I've done in the last 2 quarters. What do I think I could do in the first 2 quarters? What do I think I could do in the last 2 quarters? Could I do better? And if I could do better, well, like, you have to think through, that means the firm would have to bill X more hours. Can we do that? I don't know. Maybe not in Q3, but we can in Q4. So that's how you should get to your numbers. And it should be a stretch. That's not how anybody should get to the numbers, but
this segues nicely into slide 2 then, right? And that, let's talk through how they're accessing these type of numbers and how it's going to actually come back around to helping formulate those goals, because they're on historical records, right? You need to know where you've been in order to know where you're going.
Yeah, totally.
Bringing this back full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk to me about these KPIs, how they're accessing these, why they should be looking at these, and how they're going to be used with goal setting.
Yeah. I am happy to walk through some. Here's what I will say. This list, which everybody will have access to this handout, correct?
I'm going to send this out afterwards.
Yeah. So you'll have this list. These are very common things that some of them I think you should track, and other ones are depending on what you need to focus on, right? But number of cases opened and closed. If your contingency fee, you have to focus on the number closed. If you are hourly, or if you are flat fee, it's what is opened that is going to help you identify what revenue you're going to be able to be on track for. So either or there, I do think tracking both is important. Most people don't have good case management hygiene or fidelity within their software. So there's a lot of people that don't close out cases officially in their software. So, and that makes it really difficult to run data. So I would highly recommend that you have a system for closing out matters in your firm. Now, total firm income, for sure, but you could break that down by practice area or by matter types that are meaningful to your practice. Everything that's highlighted in yellow here is oftentimes in a spreadsheet, it's a calculation. And the reason total firm income is a calculation, you could just drop that in and type it in. But if you have practice area matter types and you drop it in for each one of those, then the total firm income can add those up for you. So that's why it's highlighted yellow. But this by practice area matter type is really important because you'll start to see what revenue streams are the most fruitful, and you will have a sense of profitability with those. So sometimes people make, a really high amount of income on one certain practice area or matter type, but the work involved is just not even worth it. So, this is where average value per case or per matter comes in. That's a calculation. And that's the income divided by the number of matters that contributed to that income. And that can be really valuable to help you determine, the higher the average value case per matter, typically the things that you want more of, because you don't have to have as much volume in order to hit that revenue. I can answer questions about that if I'm not being very clear about it.
Just give a couple examples. What do these numbers help to unearth for folks that may not be looking beyond the numbers of what the number actually matters? Is it we're going after the wrong type of client? Is our marketing wrong and we're advertising to the wrong people? Are we taking too long to close deals and we're killing the amount of time we have? Like, what are some of those? Just a few examples would be, I think, helpful.
Everything you just said is like, that's the realizations that people have. So let's just say, because of the information that I have already stated, you are able to calculate your average value per case or per matter or matter type. If you know that, and let's say that you have 3 different practice areas or matter types that you're evaluating, and let's say that one of them is $2,000 average income per matter. And then the other one is, $4,500. And then the last one is $750. Okay, so when you look at that and you start to think about and figure out, like if you're flat fee, for example, what does it take for that 750? Is it basically automated and no work? So your firm can handle a lot more without spending a lot more on resources to get the work done. Like, why not ramp that up? Right? If it's that's the definition of scaling, is being able to grow without spending more to be able to support the growth. So that would be great. But also, even the $2,000 one, maybe the $2,000 one is like, it is only about 20% of your total income comes from that kind of matter. But maybe we should bump it. Like, we love those. Maybe we should try to bump it so that, half of our revenue comes from that specific matter type. And then the question becomes, well, what do we need to do in order for that to be true, to have that be half of our income instead of 20% of our income? And so this is where rocks start to come in, because you start to think about, well, we need to do a better job marketing specifically for those. Instead of just marketing for our firm, we're going to do some campaigns or some efforts just to get those. So then you can bump that number that's coming in, which means you're bumping the revenue that it's contributing, right? So that's an example of a rock for people. If they know that they want to adjust that number, and so they set a new goal for that specific case type, then now when I ask you, what lever are you going to pull in order to make that number happen? Then you start coming up with ideas. I'm going to run this campaign, or I'm going to hire this marketing partner, or et cetera. So that's where the ideas come in. And that is making plans based on facts, not feelings.
Mhm,
Where
mhm.
most people, if they don't look at the facts first, they'll run a marketing campaign for something else in their firm or for something a little more generic for the firm just to get business in the firm. That's not targeted. That is not intentional marketing. If you want to get to where you really want to go, this is sort of how you have to trickle down and backwards in thinking in order to come up with the right ideas. They're going to really serve you.
And that's why analytics are so important because you might
Oh,
just
yeah.
get such a narrow view of some of those top level metrics, your total revenue, your total profit. But there's all these other metrics and analytics that can
Yeah.
come into play so you know which levers to press and pull
Yes.
and
It's
tweak.
all in front of you. Yeah.
But you need to have it. And I think it's setting up those systems is a first and foremost
So
type of
can I
area.
just say I know that if someone isn't hasn't been tracking this stuff, they can look at this and be like, "Well, shoot, that sounds nice, but that feels like a lot of work to get together." Or, you know, I get what she's saying, but to do this for yourself is really hard. That's why I started Velocity Work. I This work is meaningful because it will change as a business owner. It will change your life. And to do it is not straightforward. Facilitation is valuable and meaningful, and having a partner that gives you a leg up, gives you templates, or asks the right questions. Like that's the whole reason my company exists. So
Mhm.
I get it. Listen, you could take this handout that you're getting and you can go make your own spreadsheet. You can go make your own plans. You can take from this video, but I just don't want people to think that like, well, they land with this and they're like, oh my God, this sounds like a lot. Okay, well, then get some help. And whether that's through me or someone else, doesn't matter. Get yourself support so that you aren't carrying the entire load of this. You are having a partner and how to think about these things. Um, this isn't like if you had the bandwidth to sit down and do these things, you would have already done them. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, okay, what can you do to help decrease your overwhelm and make headway in the right ways for you?
I got a couple more questions, but we're coming up quickly on time here. So if
Mm,
there's anyone that has questions that are on the line,
mm.
put them in the chat or the QA, and we will try to get to them. And I'll try to round out the one or two questions that I have left, and hopefully we can get to everything. So if there's long-term goals, which most business owners probably have, or maybe that's coming out of your work with them, how do they maintain motivation to keep striving towards those goals if they do span a year or two, three perhaps?
Yeah.
And should those short-term goals roll up to the long-term ones to give them motivation to stay on track throughout those longer periods of time?
So, you have to hold your longer term what you're aiming for. You have to see that all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. And it's easy to forget why we're doing what we're doing. We said we wanted to get here at a certain time, but you get busy. So you have to have it in front of you. You have to be reminded of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is quarterly. Doing this work quarterly is really helpful in remembering, oh, yeah, that's what we're lining ourselves up with. And hey, we did a really good job this quarter. Um, there is that quarterly cadence helps keep motivation high. And another thing I would say is community, like having people around you who are also very focused on having a look this way and lining themselves up in for what matters for them. Being surrounded by that is a thing. We all know other business owners, but most business owners, the majority of business owners are just running, they're growing, they're running. There's not a lot of time to stop. They don't know how to do this stuff for themselves. And that's surrounding yourself with people who are deliberately planning and honoring their plan and staying connected to what it is that they're working for goes a long way. And accountability, of course, because that's helpful for humans.
So what's the number one reason would you say that law firm owners in particular are not hitting goals or not seeing the growth that they want? What's taking them off track most often?
Um, this is twofold. One is that for any business owner, this is not just law firm owners, you constantly have a lot going on in your head about the business, not just the legal work, but also the business. So both things are taking up space in your brain. And every day we wake up to do our best, right? But every day there'll be something that pulls your attention and you will start to make some headway on it. And then, the legal work will pop back up and takes your focus away from the on the business work. You deal with that. And then you have a day again where you're like, okay, and there's something else that feels meaningful. And so what people do is they do a little over here, they do a little over here, they do a little over here, they do a little over here. All of them are important, but because there's no constraint, like picking what you're going to get done, they are doing a lot of good work, but it never really amounts to what they want it to amount to. And so hopefully that answers some. But the other part is just the legal work, like client work. It is a lot. And if you're still in a phase where you're handling a lot of that or most of that, um, it's competing against the on the business work. So being able to separate your space out and carve out non-negotiable time for the on the business work, even if it's a small amount, can go a very long way.
Yeah, obviously the first point, it relates exactly to what Smith AI preaches and what we do. But
Yeah.
even beyond Smith AI, alleviating business owners from having to worry about missing calls and missing potential clients, I want to press even harder on the fact that it's reducing the amount of interruptions and what that does to your mental load when you don't have to worry about all those distractions and interruptions throughout the day. It's not just the fact that we're picking up the phone, we're handling those leads, and we're taking that off of your plate, but
100%.
it's more productive to not to avoid those distractions altogether. I used to work at a marketing agency way back in the day, and they had a protocol where we had to respond to client emails within 15 minutes. So we had to drop what we were doing and respond to client emails. It was like their promise to clients. And the amount of times you had to break your flow state in order to respond to a simple email, a complex email, whatever it was, all day long we were just responding to emails. You couldn't get anything meaningful done. And I
Mm-mm.
think I still, it's still ingrained in me, that concept, because I'm sure that law firm owners, other service-based business owners do the same exact thing. They're trying to practice law, they're trying to work on some sort of important document, and they're getting a call, they're getting an email, they're getting a chat. They know it's important. They know they've read articles, listened to podcasts of how important it is to respond to those immediately. Breaking that flow state is detrimental. It's such a horrible way to work. And I'm not just saying that as a sell to Smith AI. I'm saying that to
Oh,
kind of click on this topic here. That's one of the areas that probably is making the biggest difference into hitting goals or missing goals.
definitely. When people are first working with us, usually one of the things that we have to help them do, so they're rocks, are basically to get things off of their plate so that they can focus. And so that's where Smith AI comes in. Like that's a perfect example of a solution where they're gonna get themselves onboarded with, that's the rock, on board with Smith AI. And how can you, like, so basically what I was gonna say is that's the job at first, is removing things, which takes work, removing things from your focus so that you can focus on the the most important things. And answering client emails and stuff is important, but it's on the things that you should be
But
focusing on.
you can
Somebody else
mask
can
that
handle
work
the
to be
other.
more efficient with it. There's
Yes.
ways to be more go about conducting that work more efficiently.
Yeah. I mean, we
Not
only
every
have so much time in a day. So what are you going to spend it on? Are you going to spend it on answering the phones?
right.
Or are you going to spend it on being intentional with your growth?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know?
Why those goals are important to kind of summarize this. That's why it's important to set those so you can stick to them and you can figure out the ways in order to stay committed to them in order to
Yes.
actually get them by the end of the quarter or the end of the year.
One more thing, quite honestly, some of it is just sabotage too. Like we have a way of working. We have hustled, like all of us know how to work really hard. You wouldn't be where you are if you didn't. And so you kind of get in this game where you can just work to get success. Okay, the jig is up at some point for you with your law firm because you
Mhm.
can only do so much in any given time, but we kind of have an MO. So you're just going after it and then you hit the wall of pain and you have to start offloading and unloading in a really responsible way. Um, and it's almost a form of sabotage, just the way our default normal way of being
Mhm.
sabotages us from the things that we really want. So yeah, that's another piece of it.
Absolutely. Melissa, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here with us. For anyone that registered for this event that is watching this playback version, after the fact, I am going to send out an email that has a link to Melissa's website as well as that document that she shared on setting goals and what that structure looks like. And if you need to get in touch with Melissa, there will also be her contact information in that email as well. So,
Yeah.
Melissa, thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us for another master series as a part of Smith AI's webinars. Thanks so much,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.